All right, welcome to week 2 for Philosophy 101. First thing I want to go over is the fact that during this week we'll have our first of the bi-weekly reflective conversations. So to that point, the first thing you guys need to do is make sure that you filled out a time slot on the Google document indicating what date and what time you'll be meeting with me. The second thing is, if you're an on-campus student, which the majority of you guys are, you'll be meeting in my office, Sullivan Hall 209C, okay? And you'll be meeting at the time slot that you indicate on the Google document. If you're an on-campus student or a remote student, we'll meet over Microsoft Teams. Now, if you are a remote student and please, when you fill out the time slot for when you're meeting, please make sure to just indicate on that time slot that you're remote and that we'll need to meet over Teams, or just send me an email. Yeah, and just to speak a little bit more on that, when we're meeting, first thing is kind of just an introduction, but also remember to come having looked over, thought about the readings, having watched the videos, and you want to come with something to say, something that's kind of on your mind, something that's piqued your interest, whatever it might be, such that we can mutually delve in together and reflect on the particular points from the text and the readings and from the videos that are worth pondering in a more profound way. And so you have to have done that. You have to have done the readings and watched the videos. You have to have thought about it. You have to have written some stuff down. You'll have to come with that fresh in your mind, as it were. Because if you don't, there's really nothing to talk about. It's not really a conversation, and you're not going to get credit really for showing up. So it shouldn't be, what I mean by that is not to put pressure. It's more like things that first of all, when you come to have a conversation, you should come to have something to say. So it's not really about pressure. It's just kind of the normal thing that you do. But second of all, if you're paying attention to the readings and the video, certain things are just going to pop out or show up to you as interesting enough to want to talk about more. And that's it. These conversations aren't going to be super long, not going to be super intense, especially the first one's going to be pretty relaxed and easy. So it's but you have to have come with something in mind that you want to talk about. And don't overstress it, but have it on your radar, and have it on your radar in a sufficiently robust manner that it can generate a good conversation. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is that we have 3 readings for this week. There's going to be the first reading called Contemplation, a Long, Loving Look at the Real. The second reading is excerpts from Joseph Pieper's The Philosophical Act. And the third is a short poem called A Day of Sunshine by William Wordsworth Longfellow. Now, let me just kind of set some stuff up, and then I'm going to get into those readings and then offer some further kind of reflective thoughts on it. Keep in mind what we talked about last week in terms of wonder and contemplation. Wonder as an attitude of approaching a mystery. Wonder as in a sense of being moved and shaken to your core. Wonder as in something that draws you outside of your normal way of thinking. Wonder as in something that strikes you and moves you to contemplate it further. Wonder as in something that you're not trying necessarily to accomplish anything. The childlike sense of wonder is also very important to bear in mind. So we're going to be building off of that and kind of looking at what wonder and contemplation mean in some specific manners throughout these readings. And okay, let me just kind of get into the readings then, and then I'm going to offer more thoughts to this. So the first is reading this Contemplation, a Long, Loving Look at the Real. One of the things to pay attention to is how he offers a division of 3 main things he's going to talk about. It's very important to kind of focus on that and see what he's trying to get at in each section. All right. Now, he starts off also by posing a sense that, like, we are in this world today, in our society today, in our culture today, there's a very intense vein of thought which pushes us to always see things as useful, as having practical value, as having utility for us. So that when something is very valuable, the more valuable it is, the more useful it is. So there's a sense of equating value and usefulness. And that if something is not immediately or obviously useful, if it has no practical utility, it might be deemed valueless. What's the point? Why bother with it? It's interesting to kind of think on how dominant that thought process is. You know, you could easily see somebody coming to college in a certain way of thinking, okay, well, this is my first semester and I'm going to these classes and I'll get through that. And then I'll go into my second semester and I'll try to get through that. And I'll try to accomplish very good grades, try to have success when I'm playing my sport. I'll do that every year. I'll set up my schedule so that it facilitates those sorts of accomplishments. And then by the end of the 4 years, I will have, earned proper success in my sport, but also success in my academic career, such that I graduate with a high GPA in a discipline that is conducive toward me obtaining the job in the future that I would like to get. Now, obviously, that's normal in one sense, but when you kind of stop and you think about that, you recognize, wait a minute, one of the things that might be going on here is that whatever kind of other opportunities might come on my radar for engaging profoundly and meaningfully with the world around me are kind of pushed to the side precisely because they don't seem to have the kind of necessary utility or usefulness that is important for me accomplishing my goal, my end that I'm working toward. So there's an expression people will call putting on the blinders. Now, blinders was something that were put on horses to prevent them from seeing their peripheral vision, so that they would only focus on the end goal that the horse driver was trying to get them to reach. But we kind of do that to ourselves to some extent. And it might be the case that one of the blinders, as it were, that we put on that this essay discusses is the belief that everything that we do, which is of high importance or meaning, has to have some genuine usefulness toward meeting a certain goal, toward the accomplishment of something, toward the achievement of something. And that if it doesn't seem to have that connection toward achievement, accomplishment, and reaching a goal, then what's the point? Why bother? And it's sort of, as it were, off the radar. So it's I think an important exercise here that the essay is getting at, which is how dominant is that vein of thought? How deeply rooted is it? How much does it really influence and inform our sense of not only the world, but also our sense of ourselves in interacting with the world? What it's like for us to engage with reality insofar as we might think, what can I gain from this? What can I get out of it? How does this enable me or to reach these goals that I have in mind? Maybe, though, to some extent, it's important also to recognize that there are a lot of things that are worth engaging with that don't have that utility. In that same vein, he's going to also start getting us thinking about the fact that sometimes doing nothing, as it were, is actually quite important to do, even though it seems utterly useless and a total waste of time and a big problem. There's a lovely phrase from Zen Buddhism, which goes like this: sit quietly, doing nothing, grass grows and spring comes by itself. What's being said there, I think, to some extent, is the notion that the changing of the seasons and all the wonderful things that happen with it, all the amazing things of life coming back, the return of something as mundane as grass, which is still an amazing sight to see and behold and contemplate, all of those things and more, they occur in their own time, in their own way, and are the response that we have to them is not to try to force that or accomplish anything, but in a sense, we're doing nothing. We're witnessing it. We're being drawn into it. We are seeing it at a profound level. So if you can imagine the sense of somebody who's able to sit quietly, meaning they're not distracted, they're not trying to get anything, they're not seeing this as a waste of time, they're fully present in that moment, they're fully there, they're present with what's going on, they're drawn into it, they have a deep interest in it, and they're not trying to get anything definite as a result of being there. That's going to start us thinking in the vein of thought that this essay is moving toward. And, you know, another way to perhaps depict this is to imagine somebody, might say, sitting on a park bench or a bench outside of a tree or a park. And if somebody were to, and he's just sitting there, taking it all in, as it were. He's not waiting. He's not trying to kill time. He's not just there because he has to go on to something else. He's not bored. He's not distracted. He's not on his phone. It's a weird kind of image to think about. It seems, well, what the heck is the person doing? Why are they doing this? Kind of awkward. You're not exactly sure how to figure it out. But that kind of image might be important as a portrayal or display of what it might look like to engage with philosophical wonder at this deeper level, where what you're doing is not so much geared to accomplish anything or fill time or avoid boredom. It's rather that you've quieted down enough to be present with the reality that's always there, but often not on our radar. Sort of like being drawn into something that is constantly present, but often ignored or disregarded. So there's a kind of returning back to what's there, but which we've sort of glossed over. And that, you know, to connect it back to some extent from last week's lecture too, it's that childlike sense that there's a beauty and a wonder always there. We just don't realize it most of the time. But when the child who hasn't been used to things and become bored by them or tried to ignore them because he's trying to accomplish something else or whatever, he's going to always come back to the things that are around him because he finds them fascinating. And that's a similar sense of an attitude or a mindset that might be conducive to the practice of contemplation, where the need to accomplish, the concern with getting somewhere, the concern with advancing one's life, the concern with success, the concern with achievement, the concern with making sure that you're using the moment to the fullest extent possible for the realization of certain goals, all of those concerns kind of fall to the side. That's not what's on your radar, as it were. Okay, another thing that starts to come up is this idea of contemplation, which he describes as a long, loving look at the real. All right. Now, that's an intense, very kind of powerful presentation of what it means to have this practice of contemplation. I kind of want to go through each element of that long, loving look. Now, look, let's start with that. To look in this regard is to pay heed to attend to. Attend in Latin means to stretch toward. So you're being moved outside of yourself on a very profound way to engage with something beyond yourself. It's no longer about kind of being self-enclosed and shut off from reality or worried about things for yourself, you kind of, there's a self-forgetfulness to that. You're not focused on yourself. You're not caught up in yourself. Your thoughts aren't geared toward yourself. Your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, etc., are engaged with something beyond yourself. So you're looking not as in something that merely passes in front of your visual field, but something that becomes a focal point that rivets your attention, right? You're stretching toward it. You know, one example that people, you might think about instances where you're caught up in a movie that you've seen and you're really drawn into it and engaged with it, or a conversation, or a game. The similar thing happens in the looking that unfolds in contemplation, where you don't take your eyes off of this. It can have almost a mesmerizing quality to it. Now, it's not obsessive. It's not the sort of look where you're trying to find something, right? It's not trying to solve a puzzle. You're not trying to find a treasure or something like on a map. You're not looking into it to kind of figure out exactly what's going on and then move on to the next thing. It's more of a receptive beholding, where you're taking it in because it's so much, there's a lot of depth, richness, meaning, and mystery, that you just want to sort of be present with it. Conversations, I think, are important and helpful analogies here, where in a good conversation, you're taking in what the other person has said, you're fully present, you're not distracted, but you're regarding the other person in a profound way. You're not looking at other things, you're not thinking about other things, but you're engaged with the person in a manner that whatever he or she has to say can be presented to you in a way that you receive it and you respond to it meaningfully and well. You know, or another example might be someone who spends hours just looking at a particular piece of art. The painting calls to them in some way. They are attending to both individual aspects of it, but to the whole thing. Or watching a sunset for a while, right? Or the ocean, if you've ever done that, or the mountains. You don't move to go anywhere else. There's the moment sort of takes you over, and everything else recedes into the background. This becomes the main or only reality that captures your attention, to phrase it in those terms. But it's also, again, it's a receptivity. You're not trying to accomplish anything with this. You're not trying to get anywhere else. You're not trying to figure out something, solve something, gain information. You're letting it, the mystery and the beauty of what's in front of you, unfold in your visual field, so that you are taking it all in on a much more profound and almost intimate level. It's drawing you to know it more deeply. Now, let me go with that. It's a long, the look, it's a loving look. Well, loving seems an odd phrase, but the author describes this well, that a loving look is one, first of all, where you are emotionally invested, and you feel this deeply. It's a movement of the heart. It's not like looking at something through a microscope merely so that you can make a diagnosis or make a analysis of a bacteria or something like that can be used to find out information. This is one where there's a heartfelt sense of the reality that you're moving toward, and a heartfelt desire to know it more intimately and have a deeper communion with it. So when we think about love, we often think one of the helpful notions that comes to mind is a sense of people who are in love want to be together. Love is something that moves us toward deeper unity. The greater the love, the more people are united together. They cooperate together, they live together, Their thoughts often align, their life goals often align, their hearts are in alignment, their minds are in alignment. So there's a space of profound and really amazing unity that is part and parcel of the reality of love. When we are engaged with contemplation as this loving look, the reality that we attend to in this way is one that we want to know more intimately and have a deeper union with. We want to come to understand it more fully. We want to have that more heart-to-heart connection. That's going to sound weird, right? But one of the examples that immediately should be obvious is how we relate to pets, right? We love our pets and we want to know them. We want to have that deeper connection with them, even though they can't communicate linguistically back to us, even though they can't tell us exactly how their day has been or their week or what they're going through. We still have a deep sense of what they are like and who they are, despite that kind of barrier of language. I think that offers a helpful sense of a similar sort of loving understanding that can happen toward all of reality, right? So that you come to know, somebody could come to know something like a tree and really have that deeper sense of it and that union with it, even though it doesn't speak, similar to a pet. We can still see what's going on, desire to know more about it, and have a kind of profound affection for it. And that's an important term too, I think, that there's a tenderness almost involved in this. It's not about obtaining information. It's not about figuring out what's happening. You're not trying to solve intellectual puzzle pieces here. You're not. So let me just explain this in a little bit more detail. In certain fields in science, for example, say a zoologist were to study your cat or your dog, he's going to talk about the species of animal this is, how it is related to other similar species, maybe the evolutionary history of development for this particular animal, the life expectancy, certain kind of neat features of it, the color of it, how the cardiovascular system of this particular animal works, how its respiratory system works. He might be interested in how it can, what other new sorts of subspecies might develop if this were crossbred with particular other sorts of cats or dogs, etc. All of which is interesting information. All of which is, involves testing hypotheses. It involves collecting data and having analysis of that data. It involves certain tests, etc. But hopefully you can see how the zoologist's study of your pet is not a process by means of which he comes to know your pet the way that you know your pet. He doesn't know it intimately, personally, in a unique manner. The pet for him is merely a specimen of a certain species, a certain example of that particular kind of animal that he can study, but not relate to deeply. This isn't to say that that's what the zoologist is doing in that case is bad or wrong. It's just to say it's very limited. And it's very different from the approach of a loving look. Right, you would be hard pressed to say that a zoologist studying an animal or a biologist studying a piece of bacteria has a loving look at the reality that they're studying. They might be curious about it. They might be great. They might appreciate the fact that they can get new information and knowledge by means of this thing. They might use this as a particular specimen that helps to formulate a theory that then is developed into a larger picture of the world scientifically. But none of that is actually going to involve the kind of particular unique relationship to a particular unique thing that's ultimately a loving relationship. Okay, it's just another way of thinking about this that hopefully can get your mind turning in this direction. If you've, there's a difference sometimes between, say, going to a psychologist who might want to analyze you to figure out certain problems, and then having your mother listen to you when you're talking about those same problems. The way that the psychologist looks at you is probably going to be different from how your mother looks at you. Not that the psychologist is bad or evil or anything like that, but it's much more analytic, desirous of obtaining facts, desirous of sort of having a diagnosis of a certain problem. Whereas in the situation where you're telling this maybe to your parent, your mother, a friend, that person might look at you with love, right? They might respond lovingly to what you're going through, not to figure it out, but to be present and to be compassionate and sympathetically responsive to what you're undergoing. That is an analogy for this point that the essay is bringing out, that the engagement with reality done in and through contemplation is one where the reality is something we approach with love and which generates a further love. We're there to be with, to know, to understand in an intimate way, but not to conquer, not to figure out, not to dissect, not to diagnose, not to analyze. It's a long look, all right? You're patient, you're unhurried. That's a good way to describe it. You're not trying to get anywhere else. You could stay there for as long as possible. In one sense, the normal senses of time just don't matter. It's like, again, just think of a conversation. You can't measure the value of a conversation by the length of time that it unfolded in. You can't measure the value of a relationship by saying, well, we've been friends for 14 months, so that's what makes it important. It's like there's a huge distinction between the qualitative value of something and a quantitative measurement of it. It's important, and he's saying that when we have this contemplative look, we're not operating under a normal sense of the measure of time in terms of seconds, minutes, hours, whatever. It's much more so about the depth and the quality and being there in an unhurried, patient, and gentle way so that we can take in and be with lovingly the mystery and intensity of the reality as it unfolds for us. So then he's going to offer a couple of suggestions about how to engage with this. He talks about a desert experience. Going out to the desert means you're alone. There's not a lot else to distract you. There's nothing, a lot going on. You're having to fully engage with what's right in front of you right then and there. It can be awkward. It can be difficult. It can be stressful. But eventually you sort of move past the normal frames of thinking and doing that would work against the possibility of a contemplative encounter. Sometimes it's like, it would be an analogy with this. Somebody who says, I'm not going to get on social media for, say, a week so that I can be more fully present with my roommate, all right, or with my friends, or with my teammates, because they find that their interaction with social media takes them away from being fully present. And yeah, that's an awkward thing to do. That's tough to do. At first, you're going to feel bored. You're going to feel out of sorts. You're going to feel, what am I going to do? What's going to grab my attention? How do I navigate this? How do I get through this, etc.? But the point being that as you are able to be more and more with that disengagement, with that the other realities around the person might start to grab their attention, like I was describing earlier. There might be an open space of mind and heart and soul in which, and by means of which, someone is drawn into a deeper sense of and response to the world around them, the world that's always already been there, but one which we have perhaps ignored or not attuned to because of distractions or engagement with other stuff that have taken us outside of being present and being where we are as it is. One of the things that he's also talking about is the ability to have a joyful response to this, a festive response. But joy is a good word, and joy here means, you know, not like over the top celebration, but a profound sense of peace and a profound sense of contentment that kind of seeps into this. So if you can think of times in life where you've just been very at peace with what's going on, and there's a profound sense of contentment and happiness that resides in what you're doing and how you're doing it, that gives an insight into the kind of joy he thinks is an important facet of this contemplative engagement with the world. That there's a sufficiency of it. It's enough. It's more than enough to be where you are contemplatively taking in the world around you. So that, like, watching a sunset, there's no sense that I need to be anywhere else. Not pressured to perform anything. There's no stress about accomplishment. I feel myself kind of peacefully there in wondering contemplation of the profound beauty of the sunset as it takes place in front of me and for me. I could rest in that. I can dwell in that moment. I can, you know, there's a sense of like my whole being, my body, mind, and soul are really at peace in this experience. Then he's going to talk about wonder. I think, you know, I talked a lot about wonder last week. I don't want to belabor any sense of that, but wonder here meaning also the capacity to go beyond curiosity, to not try to explain, and to desire to be present with a mystery. Not a mystery to be solved, but a mystery to be loved, a mystery to be related to, a mystery to be known in its mystery. One where you don't want to figure it out, you don't want to explain it down to its most minute detail. You don't want to reduce it to saying, you know, it's like when you're relating to another person, you don't, and the relationship unfolds and it becomes meaningful and important. You don't relate to that person merely as a set of, say, psychological drives or mental illnesses or problems. You relate to a person in his or her depth, in his or her heart, and you're not trying to just explain every action of the person. You're rather trying to be present with the person, and they are trying to be present with you. This also involves a sense of play. You let your mind play with new ideas. You're playfully engaged with it. There's an openness to it. You're like the kids at play, that they just want to keep doing the playful thing that they were doing, inventing imaginatively new ways of approaching the world around them. And this connects very much with his sense of not being desirous of possessing the reality that you're contemplating, but let it be what it is, speak for itself, and allow yourself to be moved into it rather than trying to move it into you. And he's going to close with, I think, some very profound notions of worship and prayer, because he says that as somebody is drawn in this way toward contemplation and wonder, they will touch what Sam Keen called the threshold of the holy. They'll be moved to the consideration of the ultimate realities of the universe, the absolute, as it were, the divine. Something outside of the normal sense of things is going to strike them. Something maybe even transcendent is going to come to manifestation. There's going to be he calls it the word touch. You know, your mind, your heart, and your soul might touch a sense of a deep mystery that's at the root of all reality. Might have that relationship kind of come into play in those moments. That kind of wraps up the discussion on contemplation, a long, loving look at the real. And then sort of give an overview of the philosophical acts, because I think this is also quite important to what we're doing here. So as I present on the, you'll see this, I'm going to have you kind of skip over several sections of it, just because they're a little bit tangential, not super tangential, but tangential enough so you don't have to worry about that. Those sections you can skip over in the reading are obviously the ones that are crossed out as the blue drawing over them. All right, now Pieper is going to start talking about, what the heck is philosophy? What does it mean to philosophize? What are we doing when we practice philosophy? And he's going to say this is a philosophical question. So the very act of asking what is philosophy is to already engage with philosophy. So we're doing philosophy even as we ask the question, what is philosophy? We're thinking philosophically as we think about the nature of philosophy. And then he's going to say on page 62 something very important, that to enter into philosophical engagement and thinking is to kind of go outside the workaday world. And this is a really important notion, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. Bear in mind it's the translation from German, so workaday is kind of an awkward phrase, but I think we can make sense of it, and good sense of it. What he means by workaday world in some sense is the normal frame of reference that we have, the normal sense of things that we have. So you could use as an example somebody who gets up, gets dressed for work, commutes to work, goes to work, performs his work, comes home from work, and then is really tired at the end of the day. They're not really engaged with anything else. They're not really present with the people in their home. They kind of watch TV for a couple hours, then they fall asleep and they go to work the next day again. Now, one of the things that we see in that sort of situation is somebody who doesn't have a sense about or really interaction with things that are outside the scope of their work. What they're mainly interested in, where their energy goes, as it were, is almost consumed by things related to work and accomplishment. And in that sense, the people and things around them that aren't directly under the scope of their work kind of fall off the radar screen, as it were. They fall outside their purview. The most important thing for this person seems to be what is related to the accomplishment of the tasks of work. Maybe either getting to work or coming back from work or performing the labor that's necessary at work, etc. So this, of course, connects us back to what was said in the other reading. For such a person, his everyday world is very much focused on, and you might even say obsessed with, accomplishing the tasks related to work. It's about achieving that. It's about meeting those goals. And go think back to what I talked about with blinders, right? Where the person is sort of blind to reality that might be outside of that. This sort of consumes all of their attention, okay? Another way to look at this, and this is a bit, I'm going to play with an analogy here, is that it's, I said earlier, frame of reference. You can also think of it like a horizon. Now, if you've ever been to the ocean or even on top of a mountain, you realize that there is or looking over the prairie, for goodness sakes, but the ocean is a very clear example of this. There's a certain point at which your visual field ends. It's like the limit of what you can see. It's the point when you're looking out of the ocean where the ocean and the sky seem to meet. You're not going to see anything past that. And also, so that's directly ahead of you, and then there's the kind of frame with your peripheral vision, right? There's a certain, that's all that you can see insofar as you're looking at the ocean from that point. Now, if you think about this in a bit of a more metaphorical sense, then what you kind of can imagine is a person whose horizon, whose what he sees as most meaningful and important is only that which relates to his job, only that which relates to his work. So for him, anything that's not about accomplishment, achievement, goals, that's not about usefulness, that's not about labor, etc., is, as you might say, outside of his field of vision. It's not on his horizon. So just as somebody who's looking out over the ocean, they can't see past a couple miles into the ocean. So even if there's like a huge cruise ship passing by there, they're not going to notice it because it's not going to show up on their field of vision. And the same way for somebody who's kind of super focused in this way on the tasks and the reality of work, he might have very interesting things or wonderful realities that are fairly proximate to him, but he's not going to see them because his frame of reference or his horizon is so limited by and caught up with his work. Pieper's point is that we're all kind of drawn into that kind of frame of reference or horizon that can dominate the way that we encounter the world, that can become the dominant world view, as it were, the way that we view the world. Think back also to what I said about somebody who's super hyper focused on the accomplishment of all the tasks necessary to graduate with a certain degree, that everything else just falls by the wayside in the meantime. That's also reminiscent of this kind of workaday world that is part and parcel of how we might approach our lives in today's culture. Right? He's not saying it's bad, he's just saying it's very limited. His final image to this is, if you can imagine somebody, in a situation, how do I say this best? Well, it's like a dome. That's another image he'll use. It's like a dome that's placed over our lives so that we only can see the inside of this, anything that's underneath that dome. Whatever's beyond it is outside of our experience. We can't really touch it, taste it, see it, interact with it, etc. And the dome, he's going to say, is kind of something that we impose to some degree on ourselves insofar as we are obsessed with work. It's like those self-imposed blinders I was talking about earlier. And so somebody trapped within this dome has no interest in, sense about, desire to know, desire to understand any reality that falls outside the dome. That's off the proverbial radar screen, as it were. So you're kind of trapped in the self-imposed dome of obsession with accomplishment and work. That's the briefest way we could describe the workaday world. Page 65, philosophical question always pierces the dome. Why? Because it asks questions and raises issues that are outside of the scope of the dome. They're outside of the scope of the workaday world. They're beyond what we would consider important. So for example, if somebody asks, what's the deep meaning of my life? That's a question that is different from getting up and going to work and making sure you're on to work at time, and then your boss doesn't yell at you, and then you can climb the corporate ladder, and then you can get the vacation that you want, and get the car that you want, and the house that you want, and have a nice kind of comfortable life. The question of meaning, what is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning of life? That sort of question is not raisable or answerable, or you can't really even think about it in terms of merely work. It's a question that goes beyond that and asks about the work itself. So for example, you can ask, how best can I accomplish this task at my job, which would enable me to get a raise and then a promotion? That's a question asked within the scope of the work. But to ask, why is this work important in the first place? Is this an integral aspect of the meaning of my life to engage with this sort of work? Why do we have work at all? Those sorts of questions are questions that you have to ask outside of that scope. You have to ask outside of that horizon or that frame of reference. So another analogy might be, when you're in a particular room, you might ask about, how long is the carpet in this room? How tall are the walls? How much space is there in this room, etc. But you have to be outside of that room to say, how does that room relate to other rooms in the building? And you have to get outside the building to then say how many, you have to get outside even that scope to ask how many rooms are in that building. And then you have to get outside the building to ask how tall is the building. So you have to keep going outside of and up to next levels in order to ask certain questions and get down to a deeper sense of things. The same thing Pieper says holds when we engage philosophically or also poetically and prayerfully. So philosophy, prayer, and poetry for him go hand in hand. They're three aspects of our human mind and soul being brought up to wonder about reality that is not contained within the dome of the workaday world, where questions, thoughts, issues strike us, where certain things move us, where we are drawn to consider things at a deeper level. So where contemplation and wonder unfold and we don't have ready answers for them and they don't fit within the scope of the workaday world, that's where this practice of philosophy and poetry unfolds in a more meaningful and impactful manner. That requires, of course, a desire, some sort of intuitive sense about the possibility of a reality beyond that workaday world, right? Where we're open to the possibility of being moved outside of it and outside of ourselves, to have our attention stretching toward something that doesn't have an easy answer, that's not part of a program to accomplish a goal, that's not a mere means to a further end, but is meaningful in itself as a wondering contemplation of a reality that is a profound mystery, but one that's worth knowing in an intimate manner. He then on page kind of 67, in the 68, he's going to talk about how sometimes there can be a pseudo-philosophy, pseudo-religion, and pseudo-poetry where things are used, things are used merely to reinforce the dome. Let me explain what he means there to some extent. In Soviet Russia and other communist countries like that, there would be they would hire artists and poets and other people and philosophers to come up with slogans, to come up with poems, to come up with pieces of art, which would reiterate the notion, that would reiterate the driving principles of the society. So it'd be, for example, an artist would draw murals to tell people it's important for us all to unite in working together for the communist ideal of a utopia. All right, the same thing happened in Nazi Germany too, where they'd have thinkers who were brought in to reinforce the notion of the superiority of the German people and the need for the German people to conquer the neighboring countries and eradicate the Jewish people. It's horrible, obviously a horrible, horrible thing. In those instances, what's being done is that the dominant horizon, the dominant frame of reference, the dominant scope, the dome, as it were, is being reinforced by the pseudo poetry or philosophy. It's not being pierced. And so there's always a danger that the life of the mind, the attention of the soul to something possibly transcendent can get perverted or warped and become merely a tool in the service of the workaday world, of the society, of the culture, rather than going beyond that and asking fundamental questions, rather than having a sense of transcendence, rather than being engaged in this long, loving look at the real, not for utility, not for accomplishment, not for benefit, but just because it's worth doing in and of itself. And so what he's saying here is there has to be a willingness to kind of, you got to step outside. You have to be beyond the normal way of thinking about things. And I'll return to the example I gave earlier of somebody sitting on a park bench holding a tree for an hour. That person doesn't fit into normal society. That person seems an outlier, an outcast, a weirdo. it'd be awkward to kind of see that. It'd be really awkward to do that for oneself. Why? Because it doesn't fit into our normal scope of what we should do in this culture, in this society. But the point that we're really starting to see here with Pieper and the essay on contemplation is, in order to actually engage philosophically in contemplation and wonder, there has to be a concurrent willingness to step outside those normal bounds, to step outside those normal approaches to things, those normal sense of things, and to run the risk of being that outcast, to run the risk of seeming to be weirdo or awkward or different, and to take in the world as it unfolds for you in this meaningful way, regardless of how it fits with accomplishment, with the normal sense of things in that society. So there has to be a willingness to, what is it called, pierce the dome. You're just outside of it. So if you can think about, another way to describe this, yeah, again, people in a building, if you can imagine a bunch of people, or I'll use a more classic analogy. If you can imagine a bunch of people who live their whole lives in a cave, and eventually somebody comes outside of the cave and realizes that what was going on in the cave is not the reality that's unfolding on the surface. And the way that things were done in the cave, he has to kind of let go of. He has to disregard and push to the side and not worry about, in order to have the experience of the sunlight, not merely a flashlight in the cave, to have the experience of this reality as it is outside of that cave, rather than being trapped in the darkness of what he had previously known. That's a similar thing that's being called for in this practice of contemplation and wonder. All right, so we go to page 71. He talks about freedom, play, right? It's open mind. We talk about that all the time. An open mind, or I love this phrase from a particular author I've read, a mind that's open to everything and attached to nothing. So that whatever comes before your mind, you're able to attend to it, you're able to receive it, to behold it, to wonder about it, to let it speak to you, to dialogue with it, to be moved by it. But you're not attached to possessing it, to getting information about it. You're not attached to certain frames of reference and ways of thinking about it. You're letting it speak to you, reveal itself to you. You're letting it kind of become present for you, not trying to encapsulate it into a nice conceptual box that you can then draw from later. You're going to, as I'll go back to what Sam Keen talked about in last week's essay, you're letting your mind be kind of recalibrated and reformed in light of what it experiences, not trying to calibrate the thing that you experience to fit it into your mind. That's what wonder is all about. That's what philosophy is all about. It's free also because it's just open-ended. You don't know where it's going to go. You can be drawn into something and keep asking questions and asking questions. It invites the possibility of encounter with mystery. You're being drawn towards something that you're not trying to figure out. There's no predetermined end or terminus that says we go this far and no further. Rather, there's all questions are on the board, all insights are on the board, all reflections are on the board. It's all available, and we're letting ourselves ask the questions that come to mind that enable us to come to a deeper insight to and knowledge of the reality in question, so that the truth about it can be revealed for us. But it's not a process over which we're trying to have mastery. We're not trying to control it. There's free play with it. So it's like, again, think to kids who have this capacity to just freely engage playfully with what they're doing as they're doing it, with the reality that's in front of them. Not because they're trying to accomplish something, not because they're trying to impress something, but because their minds, hearts, and souls are just there in this amazingly present manner, and there's nothing else that strikes their attention and seems as worth doing. All right, so then we go down to page 74. He talks about theoria, theory. Theoria in this regard does not mean a formal theory that that has been built up in an academic textbook. It means theory in this sense means to pay like reverently behold. Reverently, you're respectful, you honor the reality, you're patient with it, you don't want to destroy it, you don't want to overanalyze it, you don't want to dissect it. You want it to present itself to you in a manner that's true to what it is. So let me just speak to this for a moment. You know, a biologist can come up with a lot of theories about living things, but when they do so, they sometimes have to actually kill and dissect the reality that they're studying. So some of you may have had the experience of dissecting frogs in high school or other animals. It's kind of neat. It's interesting. You get to see the various parts of a frog. But I'd ask you to reflect on the fact that in order to do so, you had to act, the thing in question had to be destroyed, right? You had to kill the frog. So it's not a living frog that's being presented to you. It's not a living frog that you're interacting with. It's actually not really a frog at all. It's just a dead reality group of cells, etc., that you're studying, and you can see how it maps onto certain theories about the inner workings of frogs, and you can see how those theories could be tested out and verified. But in order to do that, you actually are destroying the frog. What Pieper is talking about is very different. It's not about analyzing things. It's not about dissecting them literally or metaphorically. It's about reverently beholding them as they are, letting them kind of speak to you, as it were. All right. So instead of dissecting a frog, what it might mean is having a long, loving look at a living frog for an extended period of time, such that what the frog's life is all about, what the means to be a frog, can actually become present to you in a manner that speaks to your heart. But that's just one example. You can, what Pieper's getting at is this is true for all sorts of realities and all of reality, for ourselves, for other people, for that the sunset I talked about earlier. That the theoria here is where you're receptively open with your full mind to contemplating the reality as it unfolds and coming to that deeper, intimate knowledge of it. And it can only thrive where the human spirit is unbounded, where you're just letting it be led by the reality that strikes it, that moves it, that causes this profound sense of wonder. There's a quote that J.R.R. Tolkien uses in the Lord of the Rings books, if anybody's familiar with that, where he says, "Not all who wander are lost." Meaning, somebody's life might seem to be meandering. It might seem to wander all over the place, but the person's not actually lost. They're just being led by a reality into a depth of meaning and purpose and significance that we can't always see readily. I would say something similar here holds with the contemplation and wonder. Not all who wander are lost, not all who wonder are lost. It might seem pointless. It might seem like the guy sitting on the park bench. It might seem awkward and strange and out of bounds with normal society. Doesn't mean the person's lost. It means that some other reality, one that's not always apparent to the rest of us and not always on our radar screen, is drawing that person in a very fulfilling, enriching, and profoundly moving manner, so that they're able to encounter it in its depth and in a way that gives them almost a sense of a transcendent reality also at work. This is why he's talking at the end about creation, so that we're moved toward a contemplation of the possibility of the divine and the absolute. This wonderful quote on bottom of page 76, "What do they not see who see him who sees all things?" So there's a way in which you're moving toward the possibility of an encounter with the divine, the absolute, with God, insofar as the contemplative practice of wonder in philosophy moves us toward a consideration of the deepest realities, the most important realities, and strikes our heart and our soul to freely engage with them and to let all sorts of questions and thoughts arise that move us to consider the foundation of everything and why everything exists in the first place. Okay, so the final thing to say is the poem, it's a nice kind of short poem. It's Longfellow, I think, is a solid poet. You know, I would ask that you read it slowly and carefully. With poetry, there's a couple things to say. First and foremost, don't try to figure it out. Don't try to decipher it. Poetry is meant to speak to you in a manner that moves your heart. It's not supposed to be something you can analyze. And when good poetry unfolds, you sort of see the truth of it without necessarily knowing how you do so. And when good poetry unfolds, it also enables you to see reality more clearly. So it operates almost like a lens. It speaks to the heart so that the heart can see more clearly into the depth of reality that's always there, albeit overlooked. So it's sort of a movement of the mind and the heart that poetry helps us to engage with. You don't try to grasp the exact meaning of every phrase in a kind of, how do I say this, overly analytic approach. You're not trying to say this is what this means and connect all these dots. Let it speak holistically in a way that's true to the kind of writing that poetry is. All right, that's going to wrap this up. If you have any questions for week 2 stuff or anything else, please let me know. And I look forward to meeting everyone either in person in my office or over Microsoft Teams. Thanks.